everyone, I hope you're keeping really well and having an absolutely fantastic day today. Now in this video I'm going to talk to you about overwintering cacti and succulents. Now this is only my own experience, how I've overwintered my plants for well over 25 years now. So I'm going to be sharing some tips and advice with you and how I do it, and hopefully you'll get a load of help from this video. So yeah, the best thing to do is, I always advise first of all, is when you're coming up towards autumn time. Now this depends on where you are in the world. Here I'm living in Ireland, so Ireland and the UK and many parts of Europe will actually be experiencing their sort of early autumn now. So it's the first week in October here. So this is the time when I stop watering the desert cacti anyway. I'll go on to the other cacti in a bit. I stop watering the desert cacti, so by the time the really cold temperatures kick in, they've got a chance for the soil to completely dry out to prevent root rot, and also to stop the plants from carrying on growing during the darker light levels, the shorter day levels. Now it depends, obviously you could be living in Australia for example, and this time of year is actually, you're coming up to your springtime, so this will be so the same type of advice but the other way around. So it really depends on where you are in the world. But say in Ireland, it's the first week in October, and now we're coming up to the winter dormancy period and the colder temperatures and everything. So first of all, like I said, if I was you to prevent the plants from actually what you want to do is to stop them from carrying on growing during the winter. Because not only when they go into a winter dormancy, not only does this help to prevent root rot and any damage to the plant, but it also stops them from growing, because over the years, if you've kept plants growing in the winter and if you carry on watering them and you keep them in a warm spot, they tend to grow very spindly, and this grows weak growth, and they call it etiolation. And I've had that happen when I first got into cacti many years ago. I kept them over a windowsill in the winter, and it was in a warm room with the central heating on, and I kept watering them a little bit. This is when I was in my teens a long time ago, and they grew very spindly and it looks quite unsightly. So, and then not only that, it also prevents them from flowering in the springtime. So stop all watering on the desert type cacti like this one here from sort of like the end of September up until the first week in October. Now this doesn't, obviously if you have certain plants like this one here, rainforest cactus, the Christmas cactus, and some of the other rainforest ones, the orchid cacti, they don't really have a dormancy as such, because some of them will carry on growing, as in the case of the Christmas cactus, will actually flower during the Christmas month. So you still want to keep it lightly watered, very gently water them to stop it from shriveling up and to stop them from going into a dormancy, because the orchid cacti, the rainforest cacti, and also some of the aloe veras, the aloes, the haworthias, gasterias, carry on growing. A lot of the African succulents will carry on growing during the winter months, so I still keep them slightly watered. And usually the ones that carry on growing during the winter I keep in a bit of a warmer temperature as well. I keep them inside the house, usually at a minimum of 10 degrees Celsius. So any lower than that I find can be dangerous. The same with the mellow cacti. They're a little bit different to some of the traditional desert cacti, such as the stenocactus here. These can actually cope with very cold temperatures. But a mellow cactus, if you have a mellow cacti, get to know what type of plants you've actually got, what type of cacti and succulents, because when it comes to overwintering, there's often very different minimum temperatures for your plants, so this is important. But I'm going to be talking about basically the most common type of desert type of plants and succulents. I say mellow cacti, like this one here, that usually has the psophylium on them, quite unusual. They're usually like a minimum of 10 degrees Celsius, so I would keep this in a warmer part of the house. The same with the rainforest cacti as well, and also this dragon fruit. Dragon fruit plants are a bit like the rainforest ones as well. They like to be kept sort of slightly damp during the winter months and a bit of a warmer temperature than the desert cacti. So only back onto the desert cacti now. These are the ones that you really need to encourage complete dormancy during the winter, because they don't like to be kept wet at all during the winter months. The cold temperatures can encourage them to rot. So now if you're overwintering them in a greenhouse, if you're lucky enough to have a great greenhouse and you don't have to worry about the heating costs at all, you can have a heater on 24/7, then I would say that is a brilliant way to overwinter your cacti and succulents, because as long as you keep a minimum temperature, I would say of probably between 4 and 7 Celsius, usually around the 5 Celsius. I find most desert cacti are fine long term at that temperature, but don't let it drop below 4 Celsius, certainly no colder than 2 Celsius for very long periods, because this can encourage them the rot to set in. And that's the last thing you want to do. So have a heater on in your greenhouse if you can do, if you live in a cold climate like I do here. Now the first year I had a greenhouse a few years ago and I was living in England, I overwintered them in the greenhouse and it was okay, but I had a huge electric bill because I had an electric heater in there and I kept it on a minimum temperature of 4 Celsius. And during the day, it wasn't such a problem during the winter because the winters are fairly mild, but of course of the night it would drop on, the heat would kick in, which was great, but I just found it was incredibly expensive. So that was the last time I ever overwintered them in a greenhouse with a heater. But if you don't have to worry about the cost, then that's a great way. Just have it on a low temperature, say 6-7 Celsius as a setting, so the heater will kick on if it drops below that, but don't have it any higher than that because this could still encourage them to grow, which is the last thing you want. Say if you're overwintering plants in a greenhouse such as mellow cacti and the rainforest cactus like this, for example, or dragon fruits, again a minimum temperature of 10 Celsius, so you may not want to keep them in the same place as some of the other desert cacti, maybe bring them into the house. So that you can overwinter them fine in the greenhouse. Just make sure that you have you're all bubble wrap, no leaks at all coming in. And I'd keep it at a minimum temperature of 7 Celsius in there. Now, what I do now is, obviously I find it far easier to bring all of the cacti into the house. Now I'm really, really blessed because I'm lucky at the moment to have a wonderful conservatory where I live in the house that I rent here in Ireland. And it's a huge conservatory and I bring them all into the conservatory, which is great. And I have plenty of space and I don't have to worry because the temperature in there, it's south facing, so it very rarely drops, even if at night time ever drops too low. I have a little heater on in there that once in a blue moon, if it's forecasted minus something, I will have it to kick on automatically if it does drop below 2 Celsius, but it never, very rarely does. So I don't have to worry at all in there. So the mellow cactus I keep in the room, another room, maybe it's warm, that has some heating in, because obviously it's more sensitive to cold. The same with the dragon fruit. But all the other ones I find I overwinter them fine in there. So if you're lucky enough to have a conservatory, then do that. If not, the next best thing is to put them in front of a window. Now, ideally, if you can overwinter them in a south-facing room that gets some sunshine, that's brilliant, because even in the winter when the plants are dormant, you still want sunshine because this helps with the photosynthesis. And I always find from my experience as well, the more sunshine that they get in the winter, even though they're dormant, they seem to come, it really helps the flowering in the springtime. So if you're lucky enough to have a sunny window, a sunny room, then put them as close near to the window as possible, but obviously not touching the window and away from any drafts. If they touch the window, especially with plants like this, as you can imagine, they will get frostbite. So, you know, the cold they don't like, so keep them away from a window, but also near a window so they get maximum light. And you can use tables like this as well. Now, I say I'm lucky now I have a conservatory to overwinter them, but for many, many years, I did not have that. And I obviously lived in England for a while. Then I lived on the northwest of Ireland, and it's not the most sunniest of places. It's very wet, especially during the winter. And the only spare room I had, I used to keep them out in a greenhouse in their garden during the summer, and then I used to have to bring them in for the winter. And the only room I had was a north-facing room, and it never got any sun whatsoever. But believe it or not, because I had so many and still have so many plants, as you can imagine, I put them all onto tables like this, and I put them as close to the window as possible. And some of them had to go way back, right far back in the room. And they never got any sun, They did get light and it was quite bright in there, but they never got any sun. But believe it or not, they overwintered absolutely perfect. In the spring again, I'd put them back out into the greenhouse and they'd all flower. So if all you've got is a room that never gets any sunshine, try and make it as bright as possible. I painted the room with white paint and that instantly brightened it up. So that all helps, but don't panic. The trick is to keep them as dry as possible and keep the room cool. Don't have the heating on in the room. Keep it cool, so you don't want to encourage them to go into any type of growth, and they should have a good dormancy, and you shouldn't have any spindly growth during the winter if you keep them cool and obviously dry. That's the biggest tip when it comes to overwintering. Now, obviously, when it comes to the springtime again, you're like, yay, they've all overwintered and all your plants are nice and safe. Now, what you want to do then is slowly introduce them back into brighter light levels. Now, if you've been overwintering them in a sunny windowsill or conservatory or porch, then usually I find putting them back outside into the garden or into the greenhouse isn't usually such a problem, because usually the light levels, there isn't really much difference. For example, I can put them straight back into the greenhouse and have no problem. But if you're overwintering them in a sort of like a darkish room or window that never gets any sun, then you suddenly put them all back in the garden again. Or back into the greenhouse, you could find that your plants could suffer a lot of damage. They'll get sun scorch. Now, I've had that happen to me over the years, many years, when I've kept them, overwintered them in the bedroom, and I've put them back out, straight back into the garden again. Oh, there's a bit of sunshine now, it's April, and I find that the sun will burn them because they're not used to it. And although it won't kill, very rarely would kill a cactus, it would certainly cause a lot of damage on the skin, and it would take many years to outgrow the damage, and it would permanently scar usually. So what you want to do then is what I would recommend from sort of like, it depends where you live again and what the temperatures are like. What I do, because I have the greenhouse, I'm able to put them out into the garden a little bit earlier than if I didn't have a greenhouse. So in my case, living in Ireland, I'm able sort of like the first week in April, when the weather is getting warmer, the chance of frost is a lot less. I say I do have a little heater I do put into the greenhouse in the April that I very rarely have to use. At that time, most of the bad weather's gone. I just have it to kick in if it dropped, like an anti-frost heater. But what I do is I put them back into the greenhouse, usually the first or second week in April. And what I do then is they slowly, obviously that time of year, it's not going to be massively sunny anyway. And because they've come out of a sunny spot, I don't have to worry. But the advice I'll give you, if you're putting them straight back into a greenhouse, they've been overwintering in a dark spot in your bedroom, then probably if you get any type of shade cover for the greenhouse, you don't necessarily have to put it over the top of the glass. Just put some, like a cloth, like almost like a light fleece cloth, throw it over the plants, and then gradually over the next few days get them used to more and more light. That's the best thing I could probably suggest. Now, if you put them back out in the garden, unless you live in a warmer climate, usually I'd probably wait until May or June time before putting them back out into the garden again. And in this case, again, put them under a shady spot under a tree so they get used to the extra light levels. Or if you haven't got any trees in your garden and you're overwintering, you're growing the plants back again for the spring and summer back in the garden, put some shade cloth onto them, and then slowly lift the shade cloth off until they're accustomed to the extra light levels. So again, transition it like we transition them back. When you're overwintering them, you want to transition them into overwintering by stopping the watering. When it's going back from the overwintering back into the spring and summer again, start lightly watering. I would recommend usually from mid-March, again here in Ireland, it'd be the springtime wherever you are over there. In my case, it'd be mid-March. I start watering slightly, usually when I start to see signs of buds on the plants. For example, now these are sort of going to be entering the winter dormancy, but usually sort of like sometimes the end of February, the beginning of March, I'll notice little buds starting to appear on the top. And I resist, if the temperatures are still cold, I resist the urge to water them. And I wait then until usually like the middle of March, and I'll start watering a little tiny bit, still being really careful with the watering. And then when I put them out in the April, then back into the greenhouse, they get used to the extra watering and they start to come into growth ready for the spring. And then they usually surprise me with the most amazing of flowers. Absolutely wonderful. So again, transition back into the daylight after you've been overwintering them. Very, very slowly, and obviously with the watering as well, very slowly with the watering. Now, some people have had experience of overwintering their plants in cellars, garages and basements and that. Now, I have had no experience whatsoever of ever doing that, so I cannot recommend that, but it doesn't mean to say that it doesn't work, because a lot of people have done that. They have no rooms whatsoever to overwinter their plants. They have them out in the garden during the spring and summer, and they have very successful with overwintering them in basements. They take them out of the pots, wrap them up in newspaper, and do it that way. Then come back the spring again. They gradually introduce them to light, very slightly, a bit of extra light over the following few days before putting them straight back into the garden or the greenhouse again. But now, if you've ever had any experience of overwintering your cacti and succulents out in a basement, cellar or garage in complete darkness, please let me know, because I'm very interested, because I would like to find out what results you've had with that, and has it been successful, and have you lost any plants that way. But because I've got no experience of that, I cannot recommend that myself. This is only my experience of what I found. So basically, a quick recap again. When it comes to overwintering them, stop watering them from sort of like the end of the summer, early winter. So by the time the cold temperatures really kick in, the cacti are bone dry. So there's no chance of any dampness or any rot setting in at all. And they're not going to carry on growing during the shorter length. Certain plants like the rainforest cacti, like this one here, and mellow cacti, and sort of like dragon fruit plants, they like to be overwintered at a warmer temperature than 6-7, which is like what the desert cacti usually like. I would recommend overwinter them any lower than 10 Celsius, possibly a little bit higher, 12. So if your porch or your conservatory or your room is unheated, which is great for 90% of the normal cacti, I'd probably recommend bringing them into a warmer place like a living room, still by a bright window, because these are slightly different when it comes to overwintering them. So get to know what type of plant you've got. If you think, I've got a cactus, this doesn't apply to every single cactus. Say some of the aloe veras, the haworthias, gasterias, again, some of the African succulents and the euphorbias carry on growing during the winter. I have some that carry on growing as well, and I sort of move them into a warmer spot in the house, and some of them even flower during the winter as well. For example, some of the money plants as well do. So it all depends on what type of cacti and succulent you have. But the desert plants, as in this case here, again, kept minimum temperature of 6 Celsius if you've got them in a greenhouse or in a porch or conservatory, and a little bit warmer for the other ones. And then when you're transitioning them back into the sunny again, it starts, spring is here, slowly start introducing them back to water again, just a little bit, and then introduce them back into light slowly over the following few days. Don't just put it out, especially if you've been overwintering them in a dark room, away from a window, and then like say this is away, and then suddenly put it back into the garden and greenhouse, it'll cause scorch because they're not used to the sun. You'd be left with brown marks and it would disfigure your plant. So again, throw some shade cloth over them and then gradually lift it off over the next few days. Ideally, if you put it under a shady tree, it's better still, because you can just pull it away till it gets maximum light, usually over about a week, and you shouldn't have any problems there. So there you go. I hope you found this video helpful, and let me know your experience with overwintering your cacti and succulents. I'd love to hear from you. And thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for your support you've given me. I really, really appreciate it. If you haven't done already, please do subscribe. I share lots of tips about cacti and succulents and share loads of flower videos on there. Also lots about nature as well I share, because that's my other passion, is nature as well, and health. So please do subscribe. Also give this video a big like for me. I'd really appreciate that. You can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter now as well. I share lots of things on there. So sending you loads and loads of love and happiness, as always, from Ireland. And until my next video, bye.